Yeah.
So do you guys know the term fob? Everybody?
No.
Fob?
Fob? Like, you know what it stands for?
Like a watch fob?
Oh no! I thought you said fop. Like. Okay.
So fob stands for fresh off the boat, if you're not necessarily aware of that. And oftentimes we might use it as a term derogatorily for immigrants, in particular immigrants of East Asian descent. So we have definitely an awareness about immigration in our country. It's definitely in the news all the time, Sophia. And it's always sort of on our consciousness as one of the major political issues of our time. But what does it mean to be fresh off the boat? Do we know that? It's a really hard question to answer, but I think it's a question that needs to be answered before we get on to talking about, whether we should allow more immigrants into our country, because we don't necessarily understand them in the first place. So we need to tackle that question before we can actually address any of these other decisions we make in our society. So up here we have, just one example of an immigrant coming to the United States. And I've chosen specifically to do my project about Chinese American immigrant children because that's closest to home for me. Today I'll be talking to you about, first of all, what kind of processes of acculturation these Chinese immigrant children have to deal with when they come to the United States. Second, I'll be talking to you about how that sort of process can impact what kind of goals and dreams they set for themselves. And finally, I'll be talking to you about whether we can extrapolate and talk about immigrant experiences in general or not, and what the limitations of using one kind of immigrant experience are. So, first of all, we're going to talk about actually acculturation. And acculturation is essentially how somebody coming to the United States, or going anywhere really, gets used to the culture of the region or area or country. And it's oftentimes a very difficult process for Chinese American immigrant children, and there are a lot of unique aspects about it. So, for example, we have language barriers, which are oftentimes, really accentuated in Chinese American immigrant families, because oftentimes the parents don't learn English, or they learn English at a really slow rate, because Chinese as a language compared to English is extremely different. Chinese is pictorial, whereas English is based on letters. Or you have a situation where, because the parents in the family don't necessarily learn about the culture as fast, children are forced to go into school, or the children are forced to deal with their parents who don't necessarily have the same cultural frame of reference. Whereas at school, or with their peers, they're also forced to deal with having more Chinese frame of reference, and they sort of feel alienation on both sides. So that brings us to this. This is a page from a graphic novel called American Born Chinese, and I'll just read you a brief quote here. So this boy is new. He's just immigrated from Taiwan, and he's saying, "Sorry to bother you, but you're Chinese, aren't you?" And he's saying this in Mandarin. And the protagonist of the book, of the graphic novel, is saying, "You're in America, speak English." And in the last panels, you see that the child who's immigrated more recently is forced to sort of adapt, and he's extremely uncomfortable at this point. He's sweating, So that's what the process of acculturation can entail for Chinese American immigrant children. Moving on, how this might lead into their dreams and goals and aspirations as people and as individuals. So this is something that we all sort of share. We all have our goals and aspirations, and it's something that we need to understand if we want to be able to understand other people. So for my project, I'll be surveying a number of Chinese American students. I'll be gathering data about them and coming to conclusions. And also I'll be producing a documentary that will sort of tell some of their stories and make those experiences and those data personal to you guys. After that, I'll be able to share that documentary, hopefully, across different kinds of social media and raise awareness about this issue. So finally, we come to whether we can use this immigrant experience to talk about other immigrant experiences. Well, first of all, I expect that there's already going to be some amount of diversity in the Chinese American immigrant experience, but we might experience some limitations when we move on to talking about perhaps like a Hispanic or Mexican immigrant's experience compared to a Chinese American immigrant's experience compared to a Vietnamese or Southeast Asian immigrant experience. Because all of these share different cultural factors, share different socioeconomic factors, and that can limit us in talking about exactly what the difference is between this group and that group. So maybe our understanding has to go deeper as a society. But regardless of the diversity that's present in a Chinese American immigrant population, you're inevitably going to have to try to understand that. So I'd like to leave you with this, which is that we know a lot about the fact that there are people coming off the boat. We know a lot about the fact that there's immigration to our country, and that we have an influx of immigrants from around the world. But we don't really know as much about the people who are immigrating. And that's one of the biggest issues that we have to face before we can actually deal with immigration itself. Thank you.
So questions for Chengfeng?
Kylie.
I don't know how else to say this, but why should I care? I get, because I'm not, my parents are immigrants, I get that, and I get the immigrant experience, but why should I specifically care about the Chinese American experience? Why should your audience care about Chinese Americans specifically? Because that's what you're focusing on, right? Yeah.
I mean, this project sort of started as a personal question for me. So that's where I was building off of, but why should you care about any individual ethnicity's immigrant experience if you're saying, I don't want to care about this ethnicity's immigrant experience? We have to build that consciousness in our society about other cultures and other immigrant experiences, because we're such a cosmopolitan nation in the diversity that we actually have overall compared to other nations. We have to be aware of that. And this is one piece of it, but then I move on in my project to talk about, whether we can make conclusions about immigrants and immigrant experiences in general. Avi.
So you're gonna focus mostly on Asian American experience, right? So are you gonna connect that to how that experience in particular is different or similar to other cultures?
Yes, that's one of my final goals.
So are you gonna also deal with other immigrants, from other places?
The bulk of my research is going to be on Chinese immigrant and Chinese immigrant children, because that's sort of a limitation that I tried to accept when I was doing this research, right? So I could make it a project about all immigrants, but then we would have to deal with really broad questions, and we would have to span cultures. So it makes sense as a starting point to come here and then move outward, because that way we can have sort of an example, and we can see how it differs and how it's similar to other things.
So for collecting the other data, how are you going to get credible data for that?
If I have the time, I will try to collect data about other immigrant experiences at BLS and other major demographics at BLS. However, currently, I'm going to have to address that question through my research and seeing, what differences there are between immigrant groups. Sophia.
Have you found that it's hard to be objective about your project if you have so many of your own personal experiences?
Yeah, for sure. And then, for example, in designing the survey that I'm about to send out, which is basically trying to get the juices flowing for a number of different Chinese immigrant children or students here at BLS and at other BPS schools, it's really hard to deal with my own personal experience. And that's one of the biggest pieces of data that I have, but that's also one of the reasons why I'm trying to get feedback from other Chinese American students here, so that I can make this something that's not exclusive to my own background, my own socioeconomic status, and my own family's immigrant history. Kylie, question?
Yeah, culture plays a role in everyone's life, even if you're an immigrant or not. So are you going to explore that, or just focus? Are you going to explore that aspect of it?
I think my project is going to primarily revolve around the immigrant experience, but it doesn't necessarily have to be exclusive to first generation immigrants being coming fresh off the boat themselves. One of the biggest differences that I'm expecting is a difference between first and second generation immigrants, both of whom I am surveying and who I would like to research. And then I've also discovered that as additional terminology, there's something called like a 1.5 generation immigrant, where you're so young as an immigrant. Well, you were born in another country, but then you're so young at the point of your immigration that you know your sort of like host country or destination country a little better. So like there are all sorts of variation there, and that is something that I will try to explore. So it doesn't have to be limited to first generation immigrants.
Great, thank you very much.